What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, November 8th, 2017, Hemp Day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and whatever other insanity is in store for us. It does seem like these are very chaotic times, if you ask me. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, today was supposed to be the day when all the anti-Trump protesters were going to have their collective scream in U.S. cities to just vent their grief and rage at the victory of Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And let's see. Nope, I'm not hearing anything yet. So, like the Antifa Civil War over the weekend, I think it was just a huge, huge fizzle. And I think all these symbolic moves, they're worn out. They've gone to this well too many times. Now, as you know, yesterday, bunch of elections. The Democrats are very happy. They won the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and a bunch of other victories from Maine to Washington State. And they're celebrating it as a sign that the American people are sick and tired of Donald Trump. They want the liberals back in power. Huzzah, huzzah for the 2018 elections. That's one interpretation. Or given the revelations by Donna Brazile, how the primaries were rigged last year, and probably the general election as well, the more likely explanation is the Democrats are still rigging elections, is what's going on here. And it's another reminder that Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity doesn't seem to be doing a whole heck of a lot. They've collected a lot of information. They've documented a lot of election fraud. But so far, we have not seen a single suggestion about how to change the system to make it more honest and responsive to the American people. And by the way, there were actually people in the corporate media who came on out and said that the Democrats won these governor races because Americans want illegal immigrants. Yeah, we love our illegal immigrants coming in and bringing diseases and, you know, and bringing crime in there. We absolutely love that. That's why we're voting for the liberals here. Now, DNC Chair Tom Perez has joined the chorus of voices admitting the 2016 Democratic primaries were rigged in Hillary's favor. Of course, if you've been listening to this show and reading my website for the last year or so, you already knew that. But it's now acknowledged by the corporate media. It's acknowledged by the party that did it. And Tom Perez was going on about, you know, how the Democrats have to overcome the trust gap. He says there's a trust gap now among Democratic voters. It's actually not a gap. It's more like the Grand Canyon. And the only way you're going to get past that is to delink from Hillary, but Hillary is just clinging on. She's not ready to let go here. Tucker Carlson has come on out with a new bit of information regarding the Uranium Gate scandal. And it was kind of interesting to watch him on the show where he's talking with a defender of the cause saying, well, it's not that big a deal. This uranium thing, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and there's really nothing there. And part of this deal, the reason they were able to get it through was the assurance that the uranium would never leave Canada. And that did not happen. It was another flat-out lie. Some of that uranium has already been exported to Europe and to Russia, and now Tucker Carlson says some of that uranium has gone to unknown countries, unknown destinations. Who do you think it might be? Probably not Switzerland. And so with this Uranium One deal, in addition to just the outright corruption, betrayal, and treason, Hillary and Obama, who went along with this thing, have totally undermined any efforts at nuclear non-proliferation. Because anybody can build a uranium bomb. It's really very simple. Two subcritical masses on either ends of a pipe, slap them together, it goes bang. There. You all know the secret of how to build a uranium bomb. The hard part is getting that uranium. And now it's for sale all over the world, courtesy of the Uranium One deal. Amazing here. Donna Brazile, more information coming out about her book, which is not out yet. I pre-ordered my copy. I can't wait to see it here. But apparently, remember the Donald Duck protesters? Apparently, Hillary Clinton okayed that plan. She thought having these people in Donald Duck costumes to disrupt Donald Trump's campaign rallies was going to be a really good idea. That led to a clash with Donna Brazile, who actually thought it was a dumb idea. She thought it was idiotic, and by the way, she was right. But she says in the end, what was going on was it wasn't really a campaign, it wasn't really a team, it was a cult. And that's a confirmation of something I said last year when I said Hillary is running her campaign as a personality cult. And it really was. And Brazile is saying one of the major reasons Hillary lost was due to her arrogance. She had no room in her worldview for anybody else's opinion or analysis about what was going on. She was just absolutely convinced it was her time, it was her turn. She had gotten all the illegal immigrants to vote for her. She'd rigged the primaries for herself. She'd stuffed the ballot boxes. She'd gone after the superdelegates. The White House was hers for the taking. And, of course, there was that bitter disappointment. But, again, yes, arrogance was a big part of it. Hubris, if you want a different word for it. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the Justice Department has come on out saying that former FBI Director James Comey's leak of the Flynn memo to the New York Times was unauthorized. See, apparently when WikiLeaks leaks a document, it's bad. But when Comey leaked a document to the New York Times, oh, that's good. That's good. It helps the cause. It helps Hillary. It's still illegal. It's a breach of confidentiality. Now, Andrew Napolitano is out there basically making a very good case. The Justice Department should pick up where the FBI left off on Hillary's email and Uranium Gate investigations. Because they've done the work. They've gathered the evidence. They've been working on Uranium Gate since 2015. They've got a huge amount of material. It's time to take this material to a grand jury and see if they will indict Hillary Clinton. That is the next logical step. Now, just because James Comey said they decided not to prosecute and Loretta Lynch said they decided not to prosecute does not get Hillary off the hook. She's never had her day in court. Double jeopardy doesn't apply. She can still be charged with all of this, and she should be. But as I've said before, we seem to have our second Attorney General in a row dedicated to protecting that narcocracy. Sessions is out there saying, well, I'm recusing myself for anything involving the Clintons and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you are basically admitting you're unable to do your job, kindly resign. Don't sit in there soaking up the taxpayers' money for your salary and your perks and everything and proudly proclaim that you're not going to do the job that we want you to do. Now, a few days ago, Sean Hannity came out with one of his mysterious TikTok messages on Twitter, which usually signals a breaking story. And basically, he came through today because he brought on reporter John Solomon of The Hill, who revealed that the Uranium One deal was facilitated by a series of decisions made by the Obama administration time and time again between 2010 and 2012 that are incredibly favorable to Rosatom. And time and again, these decisions were being made while the FBI knew there was criminality going on by that company's executives. And remember, some of those FBI officials signed off on the Uranium One deal, knowing there was an FBI investigation into bribery and kickbacks and corruption. And now some of those lawyers are on Robert Mueller's special counsel office. That's why they're trying to keep the focus on Donald Trump. That's why they won't look at Hillary and Uranium One, because they are all equally guilty. It is a clear conflict of interest, and they should not be in the special counsel's office. Mueller should not be in the special counsel office. The whole thing is actually illegal. I saw this wonderful cartoon about the big game hunter Mueller, and all he's got is this little tiny teddy bear that says Manafort. And that really is the case. The Manafort and Gates indictments are serious for Manafort and Gates, but it underscores the fact that Mueller, whose assignment was get Trump, has found nothing to prove there's a collusion between Donald Trump and Russia. In fact, at this point, it looks like the only person in Washington, D.C. who wasn't colluding with the Russians was Donald Trump. Everybody else was. Fusion GPS was colluding with the Russians, trying to come up with that dossier. Hillary was colluding with the Russians over the Uranium One deal. It's amazing. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, I know, I voted for Trump, and, I'm a Democrat, but I was looking through more of his tax plan, and what do you think about his tax plan? To think the corporate tax rate dropping it, I don't think anybody's going to be coming back to this country bringing jobs, like Apple or something. Is it more like just a gift for them? It's basically, is this Trump's tribe versus the establishment tribe going on right now?
I think it's always kind of been that way, but looking at Trump's tax plan, it does seem to favor the wealthy. The cutting of the corporate tax rate from 35 to 20% is clearly a gift to those American corporations still in the country, and maybe the agenda there is to discourage them from leaving like so many others have. But again, looking at the adjusted tax rates and the reduced number of tax brackets, the very rich are going to come out ahead on this, and the middle class is going to come out behind, and the poor are going to stay poor. So it really doesn't provide major tax relief. The only thing it does do is it's going to provide an immediate boost in liquidity, but at the risk of long-term debt accrual, because unless there are cuts in spending, obviously any cuts to taxation mean that the debt is going to start going out of control. And we have seen this kind of thing running into wars before. When they've run out of all other options and they're getting ready for war, they're going to try and get the economy cranked up, even though it means on paper that the debt is going to be out of control on the other side. But the thinking always is we're going to conquer these other countries and we're going to make them pay all the bills. That's what happened in World War I. Germany was required to pay everybody's war costs. So they may be thinking about...
I live in New Jersey, Mike.
Okay.
So I'm going to get hammered.
Probably.
Mike, I don't like the whole trickle-down economics because usually, like you said, the people who help the economy the most is the low and middle income. We're the consumers. It's a consumption-based economy. The rich really don't purchase. They purchase big rich items, but they don't consume as much as the little people.
You're absolutely right. That's why we're seeing a retail meltdown. And, frankly, please don't trickle down my back and call it rain, because we know what's really going on here. The rich are just addicted to their money, and they're addicted to having more of it, and they don't see the damage to the overall economy that their addiction is really causing. But the reality is that small businesses are responsible for most new job creation, but unfortunately small businesses are middle-class businesses, and they're going to get hit with all these new taxes. And so far, we're still not seeing a repeal of the Obamacare mandate or the penalties in the new GOP tax bill. So again, it doesn't look. It's a great deal of noise and smoke and steam and thunder and lightning, but it doesn't really signify a significant change for ordinary Americans.
Because they're all on their side. They're small oligarchy, autocracy side. That's why Obamacare repeal didn't get passed, because they're all one. It's one party.
They're all invested. They're all invested in the health insurance companies. Congress puts their money where they know the money is going to flow based on the current legislation. And if there's legislation that's going to threaten the continuing flow of money into their stock portfolio, they'll kill it. All the way back when TARP was passed following the 2008 mortgage security-backed fraud meltdown, and they passed TARP. They weren't trying to save the American people, or even to that extent the banks, so much as their own stock portfolios, which were loaded up with stocks from those companies that had been engaging in that fraud.
Hey, Mike, real quick, I want to switch over. I don't know if you know who Pepe Escobar is.
Yes.
He had a great article on Night of the Long Saudi Knives, Part 2,
Yes.
because of what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So if anybody doesn't know what Night of the Long Knives is, there's just, plenty of YouTube videos on doing some research on that. All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, apparently Donald Trump persuaded CIA Director Mike Pompeo to meet with William Binney, who worked for 3 decades at the National Security Agency, and they had their meeting to discuss Pompeo's position that Russia hacked the DNC emails. And Binney said, there are all the reasons why it wasn't a hack from overseas or over the internet. It was a leak from inside, and Mike Pompeo is still standing by his belief. He believes Russia hacked the DNC. I believe, don't confuse me with the facts and the evidence, I believe Russia is evil. And Binney basically said that this claim that Russia hacked the DNC came out of CrowdStrike, who has now pulled back from that. They don't have any evidence to support it. The download speeds on the file markers indicate it was copied to a flash drive internal to the server room. And on top of that, some of the emails that were released by WikiLeaks were written after the date that the DNC claimed the hack took place. So obviously they're lying. But the official story is Russia hacked the DNC. Russia is evil. You must all hate Russia because we're going to send your children to kill them somewhere down the road. And so here we have a government which is basically saying we're not interested in the facts and the evidence that you have uncovered. The official story is the official story. Mihi dictum est sine die. Now, Hannity last night was on fire, and he did in his monologue how the fix was in all the Clinton scandals, and he was going down the list of Uranium Gate and Primary Gate and Dossier Gate, and he's just doing some amazing work out there, and I'm surprised he still has his job. He must have a real ironclad contract. But Sean, stay out of small aircraft and suburban Washington, D.C. parks because you're annoying a lot of people here. And everybody's still out there, Russia influenced our election. That's why Donald Trump won. You know, Hillary, there's no reason Hillary should have ever lost except for those evil Russian influence. Well, the reality is if you go back and you look at who was actually getting involved in the U.S. elections from overseas, you find out it was Israel. Article out of the Viable Opposition Blogspot up in Canada asks which nation is really interfering in the U.S. electoral process, and it was Israel. Huge amounts of money, huge amounts of media influence. But that's okay. That's just wonderful. Israel's our friend, Russia's our enemy. Actually, we're all grown-ups here. We're all big boys and big girls, and we can decide for ourselves who is our friend and who is our enemy. And it's time to start doing that. Don't let anybody else tell you who to hate or love. You make those choices yourself. I would almost say that that's another inalienable right of human beings, to decide for themselves who they're going to like and who they're not going to like. Now, the Syrian army has laid siege on the terrorists in ISIL's large base north of Deir ez-Zor city. And I'm just now getting a headline somebody sent in to me. The Syrian Arab Army and Iraqi units liberate the final ISIS-held town in Syria. So it's pretty much over. The Syrian army has reportedly entered Abu Kamai, Daesh's last hotbed in Syria. So that's pretty much over. And once again, witnesses are reporting that U.S. helicopters are evacuating the Daesh commanders and flying them out from this town to an unknown direction. So remember how the U.S. government has been telling you that ISIS / Daesh / ISIL / is, whatever they're calling themselves this week, are the enemy? Kind of an interesting way to treat an enemy. Just as they're about to be killed by the Syrian government forces, send in the helicopters, pull them on out. Now, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the United States have now issued a joint statement condemning the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And this is part of a renewed propaganda effort to go back to this idea about how Assad is gassing his own people. And they're trying to get a resolution through the Security Council. The Security Council is split because most of them realize this is just nonsense. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're talking about developments in Syria. And what is going on is really very simple to understand. Over the course of the war in Syria, which is like 6 years and counting, the U.S. has tried to justify it to you, the American people, the payers of the cost of the war, the parents and family members of those who are being sent over there. We do have boots on the ground over there with a wide variety of claims. And it all, they started out trying to basically emulate the Saddam has nuclear weapons by saying Assad has chemical weapons. And Assad surrendered his chemical weapons under international inspections. And then the U.S. said, well, he's a cruel tyrant. He's oppressing his people. Well, we got a lot of that here in this country. And then they faked a couple of chemical weapons attacks, one of them right in front of the UN's chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived in Syria, which made it very obvious what was going on. And the corporate media was out there, oh, Assad is gassing his own people, his Alawite supporters. That would be like Hillary Clinton gassing Democrats. And the UN chemical weapons inspectors came on back and said, no, we think it was actually the U.S.-backed rebels trying to frame Assad. So the U.S. pulled away from that, and they said, well, we're not really in Syria to invade Syria, honest and true. We're just there as part of the war on terror to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and we're going into Syria to bomb ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And then they'd fly into Syria, and somehow they kept missing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they were bombing critical Syrian economic infrastructure, oil pipelines, water processing plants, food storage facilities, things like that. Well, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are pretty much gone from Syria. This is it. This is the final curtain, if you will. And so now the U.S. is going back to, well, we know Assad is gassing his own people. And the UN Security Council is split over this idea of yet another investigation because they're tired of the lies, the same as you are. And they see it as a very transparent attempt for the U.S. to somehow stay militarily engaged in Syria when they don't really have any kind of a reason to do so other than greed and warlust and a desire to conquer and get rid of Assad, which the American people are not going to go along with. We're a war-weary people. Now, Russia believes that the latest UN OPCW Joint Investigative Mechanism report is being politically directed. In fact, they even called it amateurish. And they're right to do so because, again, back when this happened, earlier this year, the situation was Assad was winning against the U.S.-backed rebels. The world was coming to accept that he was going to stay in control of Syria. And the very last thing he would do was use a chemical weapon, knowing that would be the excuse for the U.S. to come on in. And there were reasons to look at that chemical weapon attack and say, no, it wasn't Assad's forces. The story just didn't line up. There were timetable errors, all kinds of problems with it. But the story just didn't make sense. There was no reason for Assad to do such a thing, and every reason for the U.S. to do such a thing and blame it on Assad. So they're back to trying that one. They don't want to have to admit they've lost in Syria, because that derails the rest of the war agenda. Meanwhile, up in Afghanistan, they're still up there trying to make it look like they didn't lose in Afghanistan, and they're escalating the situation. U.S. airstrikes are soaring in Afghanistan, along with civilian deaths. The United Nations is expressing concern over all these mounting civilian casualties, but they're doing absolutely nothing about it. Meanwhile, NATO is now going to send an additional 3,000 troops to Afghanistan. They may never be able to win. They just want to be able to not have to say that they lost. We are invincible in our endless victories. All right, over in Saudi Arabia, events are developing very, very rapidly. The latest one is that King Salman is preparing to abdicate the throne and hand all power to his son, Crown Prince bin Salman. And it's probably going to come within a few days. In fact, they're saying basically once all this purging is over and all these opposition figureheads are over at the Ritz, that the king will stand down. And he's very old, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will become the new king of Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, he's already out there showing that he's a little reckless. You know, it's like when you get a new car. The first few times you drive it, you want to push it to the edge. I think Salman's doing the same thing. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about developments in Saudi Arabia, which is about to get a new king, and the very belligerent rhetoric coming out of Saudi Arabia aimed at Lebanon and Iran, where Saudi Arabia is trying to construct this idea that somehow both Iran and Lebanon have either declared war against Saudi Arabia or carried out an act of war. And these are both thin to the point of transparency. But what really kind of kicked all of this off was the sudden resignation of Lebanon's prime minister, Hariri, and he was in Saudi Arabia, and all of a sudden he calls back home and says, I quit, there's an assassination plot, I'm afraid, blah, blah, blah. Then we got these reports about how Hariri is actually under detention in Saudi Arabia. Now, Hariri had been backed by Saudi Arabia, and the speculation is that he was told to quit because he had failed to carry out Saudi Arabia's agenda within Lebanon. But there's a lot of meddling going around in the Middle East here, and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has added his voice to those who suspect that Saudi Arabia did force Lebanon's prime minister to resign. He then went on to basically vow full, unwavering support of Iran for Lebanon's stability. Now that is significant for reasons I will share with you a little further down the page here. Now, a lot of people are out there saying that the best way to tone down this crisis is for Hariri to return and resume the office of the prime ministry. I mean, just calm everything down. But we're not sure that that's really the agenda. Now, interestingly enough, the European Union and the United States have reaffirmed support for Lebanon. Now, Israel is fully on board with Saudi Arabia going after Hezbollah in Lebanon, but at least officially and publicly, the EU and the U.S. is saying, really not a good idea. Now, this isn't exactly because the EU and the U.S. care about the people of Lebanon. Their goal is to keep Saudi Arabia focused on finding a way to start a war with Iran. And apparently, the U.S. has sent $40 million of military funding for Lebanon to boost its border defenses. So they're trying to basically corral Saudi Arabia to go after Iran. But I think what may be going on here is that Salman knows Iran is going to back Lebanon. So if Saudi Arabia attacks Lebanon and Lebanon really doesn't have the means to defend itself against Saudi Arabia, and if they can goad Iran into doing anything, then Saudi Arabia can say, well, that's it. The war with Iran is on, and the U.S. hops on board, and they finally get the war with Iran they've been engineering for all these many years. Now, former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is blaming the Israeli government's resistance to the establishment of a Palestinian state for harming the prospects of a peace deal. Really, John, you just now figured that out? Yes, we all know the Israeli government doesn't want peace. What they want is a peace. They want a piece of Jordan, they want a piece of Syria, they want a piece of Gaza and a piece of the West Bank and maybe another piece of the West Bank and another piece of the West Bank. Actions speak louder than words. Meanwhile, Saudi airstrikes are continuing into Yemen, killing over 30 civilians. They targeted a residential area, and it's war crimes. It's like when the Allies firebombed Dresden. There was no military point to that city. It was done to simply crush the morale of the people and destroy their will to resist. Now, what's really interesting about this situation in Yemen, the official story is that this war is between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and the U.S. is merely helping Saudi Arabia. The reality is that the United States government is using Saudi Arabia as their new proxy in the Middle East, because the American people are just sick and tired of all these wars. And they're using Saudi Arabia to go into Yemen because the people of Yemen tried to kick out the foreign puppet rulers, the junta imposed by the United States following the last intervention some 4 or 5 years ago. And now they're going to use Saudi Arabia to get the war with Iran going. But there's never actually been a formal declaration of war by the United States against Yemen. And so members of Congress, they're still avoiding a vote on authorizing U.S. involvement in the conflict, because the U.S. is providing most of the weapons and ammunition Saudi Arabia is using. they're all hemming and hawing and looking the other way. Because they all know the wars must go on for the U.S. economy to survive, but they don't want a war vote on their record, especially going into next year's midterms. So instead, the United States is gone up to the United Nations and demanded action against Iran over that Yemen missile. Oh, how dare, just because Saudi Arabia is bombing their country, how dare Iran go to Yemen and fire a missile, or some such story. Here's the deal, the part they're not telling you. The propaganda is that Iran sent the missile to Yemen, that Yemen then fired near Riyadh, and that is justification for war against Iran. Unfortunately, no. The missile has been identified both by the Yemenis and the Saudis, who cleaned up the wreckage, as a Burkan 2H. This is a missile designed and built entirely in Yemen. It does not come from Iran. So, now probably following the condemnation of the world and the United Nations for blocking humanitarian aid from getting in to Yemen, the Saudis have now ended the blockade on the port of Aden. And I'm sure it's pure public relations. But those people in Yemen, they're caught in the middle just because they wanted to be in charge of their own country. Look at how they're suffering. Now, things in Europe are starting to accelerate there. And apparently there was a NATO ministerial meeting on preparing for war with Russia. And they're talking about things like revising NATO's command structure, including a new command to help protect the sea lanes of communication between North America and Europe. That means Iceland is going to be brought into play. And they're talking about a push to improve Europe's civilian infrastructure with an eye towards support for war. That means building up the roads so that they can support the heavy tanks and military vehicles without cracking. If you come out here to Oahu and you look at our H3, huge, something like $3 billion highway from Pearl Harbor out to Kaonohi Marine Air Station. And it is built to take military vehicles, very wide lanes, very heavy supports. It's part of the Eisenhower interstate highway system, which is kind of weird when you realize we're an island. So they're all gearing up. They're telegraphing where we're going to go. We're going to have a global war. There's probably going to be nuclear weapons. It's going to be fun. NATO, though, has run into a little bit of a road bump because apparently in Bulgaria, pilots of the MiG-29 jet fighters from the 3rd Air Base, Graf Ignatievo, are refusing to take part in the NATO air policing out of safety concerns. Apparently, the engines in their MiG-29s were recently repaired in Poland by a shop that does not have the necessary safety certifications or licensing, and the pilots are now very concerned that those engines are not reliable, that they could basically explode on takeoff, the way the F-35 engines have a tendency to do. So they want to stay on the ground, and you can't blame them. Ultimately, the pilot is responsible for his safety and the safety of his aircraft. And if the pilots don't think that aircraft is safe, yes, they could be ordered into the air, but I don't think they're going to be thinking too much about the enemy while they're up there. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is saying that Washington is responsible for the Ukrainian regime tolerating neo-Nazis and for the erratic behavior of Kiev's authority. And Lavrov said the United States bears a special responsibility for the Kiev authorities' behavior since Washington has been, in fact, manually controlling them. Yeah, we know. That's what Poroshenko's government is. It's a junta. It's a puppet government acting on behalf of the U.S. government. Now, as you know, Donald Trump is over there in Asia. He's making a lot of speeches. He's talking very tough about Korea. Don't test us. We rule the air, sea, the sky, and space, and all this other rhetoric. North Korea is actually out there saying it's very simple. They're going to continue to build nuclear weapons until the U.S. leaves them alone. Now, look at the difference between the statements where Trump is out there saying, we control the entire planet, and North Korea is saying, leave us alone. And that, of course, is the reason for any nation to be building ICBMs with nuclear warheads as a deterrent. Don't mess with us. It's not worth it. That's the message of a missile with a nuclear warhead. That's it, really. Meanwhile, in South Korea, their F-16s are being upgraded to accept an Israeli weapon, what's called the Raphael Spice 2,000-pound guided glide bomb. It's a standoff-launched munition, so everybody is arming up. So where did all this insanity begin? Well, it began with 9/11, obviously, and the claim that Osama bin Laden, otherwise known as Tim Osman over at the CIA, who basically died later that same year and has been resurrected with a bunch of actors with really poor makeup jobs. The idea that there was a video where he confessed that he did 9/11. Oh, it was all over the corporate media. Osama bin Laden said he did it. How could we ever possibly doubt? Well, apparently a German news media hired an Arabic translator to translate that original Osama bin Laden video, and it turns out Osama said no such thing. It's a $10 trillion lie, because that is how much has been spent on all of these wars, on all of these countries since 9/11. It was a hoax. It was a fraud. How many more times are you going to allow yourself to be lied into wars until you're ready to stand up and say, no more? I don't believe you. You may not have my money for your wars. You may not have my children for your wars. I know you are lying to me. Go away. I'm not listening. All right, speaking of lies and fakes, a lot of people were making expressions of concern, if you will, about that report that came out of Canada where a jeweler bought a gold bar in the little blister packaging from the Royal Canadian Bank. And the gold bar itself supposedly came from the Royal Canadian Mint. And it turned out to be something other than gold. And everybody was out there saying, oh, there's another gold fraud out there. But gee, the markings were convincing, and, it's a huge operation. Well, there's another theory, and we did mention this at the last time. Story out of Giza Death Star saying that what may be going on is these fake gold bars are being put out and intentionally allowed to be discovered to discourage people from moving their wealth into gold. Because right now, the stock market, everybody understands it's overvalued. The savings accounts are vulnerable to confiscation by the banks in the event of a fiscal emergency. And people are thinking, maybe I need to have at least part of my wealth under my own control in my own home, which does make a lot of sense. And so one way that the money junkies could keep your money in their stock markets, their equity markets, their banks, is to scare you away from buying gold, or for that matter, silver, by planting a whole bunch of fakes and making sure they get covered in the media. The problem is we don't really know, because the places where the gold is kept, like Fort Knox, are refusing audits and assays. We don't know how many gold bars are out there that are tungsten cored. We just know that there are some of them. And we do know that for somebody to be counterfeiting these smaller bars, that's a lot of work to fake that, unless somebody took a fake gold bar into the Royal Canadian Mint and put it into one of the packages. And they have had some problems with the Royal Canadian Mint with some people getting jobs there and then smuggling fake gold in, put it in the package, taking the real gold home. So it's not without a precedent there. But when you look at the media attention it garnered, you can almost sense there's an agenda. Don't buy gold. You can't trust gold. You can trust the stock market. You can trust Wall Street. You can trust the bankers. Don't trust gold and silver that you have in your own hand. It's a hard sell, but it looks like that may be a big part of what's going on. And again, the reason we're seeing the acceleration of the war agenda is we're seeing an acceleration in the indicators that this economy is not going to hold together much longer. U.S. credit card debt has risen above $1 trillion with a T. Auto loans have hit an all-time high. Student loans have hit an all-time high. Everybody is going deeper into debt, and there is no source of wealth coming in with which to pay that debt. That's a problem. That's clearly a dead-end street. All right, let's take a phone call. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to know, you said that the bankers want this war, neocons want this war to deflect attention from their handling of the economy that's going to crash. What I don't get is how the war is going to help. It might give a little boost to the economy, but then they've got to start printing money to pay for it. And when they do, people aren't going to be able to afford food in this country. And people are going to get pretty wise about the whole thing. Well,
I think that will be the case this time, but, the last two times, crash of 1907, World War I, crash of 1929, World War II, the government and the bankers were able to deflect criticism because that was before the age of the Internet, and they would just go on out there and say, we know you're all suffering and it's all the hardship, but it's because of the war. It's those bad Germans and those bad Japanese and the bad Russians and the bad everybody. And I don't know that that's going to work this time, but that seems to be the thinking. The U.S. government and Wall Street have run out of every other option. They have borrowed themselves, they've Ponzi'd themselves into a corner, and there's no way out other than just to create a huge amount of noise and hope that everybody stops paying attention to just how we got into this mess. I don't think it's going to work, but that seems to be the thinking.
Yeah, so they're going to take a chance of getting the world annihilated just to save their reputations. I know, if they don't do anything, the economy crashes and we're almost in a post-war economy then. I mean, if we got defeated. But we might get defeated and killed. And it doesn't seem to bother them.
Well, I'm sure that they're convinced that we're going to win and it will be a repeat of World War II and Bretton Woods. Anyway, Terry, got to let you go here.
I got to let you go. We got music coming up, and we'll talk to you later.
You got it. Talk to you soon. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And everybody's saying, well, the banks are all crooked, and that's why we have to go to cryptocurrencies and blockchain. Well, unfortunately, these are systems that are already being bought up and acquired by those very same banks. And the banks would love a cashless, blockchain-based society because it puts all the wealth of the people under their control. And you will have to go and grovel before an ATM machine to get money for your lunch today. I personally don't plan to live like that. I prefer a cash-based society. Once you have traded your labor for your wages and salaries, you should be free to do whatever you want with that wealth. Put it in your pocket, walk down the street, buy whatever you want without leaving a record for somebody to snoop at. So what? You bought a jelly donut on your way home from work, breaking your diet. Whose business is that besides yours and the bakery? Now, as the caller mentioned before, the so-called tax cuts in the new GOP tax plan are mostly benefiting the rich and the corporations. And unfortunately, according to an analysis that we got out of Blacklisted News, it's going to balloon the U.S. debt to 120% of the gross domestic product. Now, that's not the worst in the world, but it's getting close. Then goes to point out the boost to the economy is going to be short-lived because the interest on that debt keeps compounding and compounding and compounding, and the United States doesn't really have any new sources of real wealth coming on in with which to pay all the debts off. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline over the last 30, 40 years. American-made products used to be considered the best in the world. Not anymore. They're overpriced, poorly performing, easy to break, easy to wear out junk, and nobody wants our GMO agricultural produce. The only thing keeping the U.S. economy functioning right now is this forcing of other countries to use the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking, off of which the U.S. economic system makes a small fee. They want to be the middleman. Don't want to have to produce anything, don't want to have to deliver anything. They want to be the middleman. Just siphon a little bit of the wealth off as it flies through their control. But again, it's short term, it's not looking at the long term here. Another article that's coming on out of Russia today. The U.S. is looking to push Russia out of the European Union's energy market, while at the same time American tankers are shipping Russian liquefied natural gas to Europe. So once again, the U.S. doesn't want Russia and the European Union doing business directly. No, no, no. You will do your business through us. We'll carry the liquefied natural gas for you for a small fee. You cannot have a functioning economy for a nation unless you are either manufacturing or growing products other nations want to buy. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. It's hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about the economic news right now. And as you know, China has already established the petro-yuan. And now it looks like there is going to be a petro-ruble. Russia has made a deal with Iran to use the petro-ruble for oil trade. They're not going to go through the petrodollar. The de-dollarization of the world is underway. And that's what's got the United States in this war fever. Because without forcing the rest of the world to use the U.S. dollar and charging them interest on it, there is nothing left to hold up our economy, nothing left to pay this overwhelming debt with. We're at the end of the road for all of this. And the money junkies would rather risk blowing up the surface of planet Earth than have to be forced to be poor again when it all comes crashing down. Now, out here in Hawaii, Maui residents were very upset learning that their property taxes were going to increase by approximately $29 million for fiscal 2018. And according to county council members, the additional funding was needed to help provide better public services for Maui residents. As it turned out, that is not true. They're basically raising taxes on ordinary people to fill the gap in the state pension system. And there's a state employees retirement system, and Maui's contributions are going to surge 52%. So once again, they're taking money away from the people and saying, oh, we're going to give you more services for it. Didn't happen. It's being used to prop up the pension system, which, like so many other pension systems across the country, was defunded during that 2008 mortgage security fraud meltdown. And nobody has the strength of character to stand up and say, look, Wall Street made this mess. Wall Street ought to refund all the money to the pension plans. So instead they turn around and say, well, you're just going to have to give us more money. And then somewhere down the road we'll give it back to you. We hope. Maybe. I guess. Now, over in Russia today, they're talking to experts who are watching the situation in Great Britain. And they're noticing how more and more Britain's current government seems to be caught up or seems to have the majority of their time absorbed with fighting over Brexit, whether it's going to go forward or not. And apparently Theresa May postponed her cabinet meeting at Downing Street today. And they're looking at a whole bunch of serious problems. And a lot of people are speculating that Theresa May's government may actually collapse. Now, that may have been engineered by the Remainers, who would want to then put in a government saying, Brexit's canceled, we love the EU, we love the European Central Bank, we love our migrants and refugees coming in. Meanwhile, over in Romania, thousands of their workers are protesting against their government's planned fiscal measures. It's a repeat of what we saw in Cyprus and in Greece. You're all going to have to make do with less so the money junkies can have more. Apparently, a lot of people in France are very upset. Every year about this time, Paris has a Christmas fair along the Seine. And apparently this year they said, it's really too tacky and it's offensive to some people, and so they canceled it. And so a lot of people are now upset about that as well. All right, let's talk about Weinstein and what's going on. And again, I'm starting to think that a lot of this is being encouraged by the Hillary camp. They're hoping to throw some celebrity scandals out there to distract you from Uranium Gate, Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, all the rest of them. it's not going to work. But we are going to indulge and have a little bit of fun here. And so now we have, these allegations against all these big stars. And again, some of these allegations are probably fake, desperate attempts at free publicity. Get the name in the media. It turns out, rather interestingly, that Harvey Weinstein, along with hiring this intelligence firm Black Cube, which is comprised of former Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agents, basically came on, hired a high-profile attorney, David Boyce, to go on out and find ways to sort of crush down this story, to go after the New York Times and try and get them to stop reporting on all of this. What's really interesting is this is the same lawyer who represented Al Gore in that 2000 Supreme Court case, Bush versus Gore. So he's come on back from the shadows there as well. Now, Corey Feldman has officially filed a report with the LAPD on Monday regarding sexual assault of children in the industry. And the LAPD confirms that they are going to investigate this idea that there is a Hollywood pedophile ring. So, Corey, keep your Kevlar underwear on, because you're reaching into the very, very high levels of power. Remember the Franklin scandal? Was another organized pedophile network. They were getting boys from Boys Town, no less, and shipping them all over the country. And some of them even got taken into the White House. It was a huge stink, came and went in the flash of a second, and was never mentioned again. There was even a documentary made about it. Conspiracy of Silence, I think is what it was called. And it was scheduled to be aired on TV. It was even in the TV guide. Back before we had interactive guides on our computers. And apparently somebody went to the TV network that was going to run it and said, if you run this, we will pass laws that will make it impossible for you to continue in business. And so there was a last-minute substitution. And then some unknown party bought the entire run of VHS copies of this program that were going to be for sale. And they disappeared. But that wasn't the end of it, because a editing work tape surfaced of this film. And it's on YouTube. You can go look at it. And it's a big, ugly stink. And since then we've had, all these other allegations that apparently people in very high positions of wealth and power think that this is acceptable behavior. Or maybe they do it because it isn't acceptable behavior and they're getting off on the thrill of getting away with it. I can do things that ordinary people would go to jail for. But it's part of the pathology. I guess, if you're sick enough to be a money junkie, you're sick enough to abuse children. But it's lurking out there on the edge of our consciousness that something really horrible is going on. And I wish Corey Feldman luck as he moves forward on this. All right, let's talk about the Texas shooting, which has been seized on by the gun grabbers, even though the shooter was confronted and shot and chased by a law-abiding citizen with an AR-15. But that doesn't count anymore. We've got to take all the guns away. We've got to take all the guns away. And apparently there was a moment of silence Monday in Congress for the victims of the Texas church. And apparently California Representative Ted Lieu just got up and walked out during the moment of silence and said that he was not going to respect the victims in Texas because he's too busy ensuring the destruction of gun rights. All right, let's take a phone call here. Frank in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. Do you recall the name of the group that provided security for the World Trade Center complex back, pre-9/11, at the time of 9/11?
I don't remember the name of it, but I think one of the Bush family members was part of that company.
Yeah, I think it was Marvin Bush.
Yes.
One of the lesser talked about Bushes. I have forgotten that point actually, but the reason I brought it up is because I remember, like, you know, when I was doing my research on 9/11, maybe, you know, 10, 11, 12 years ago, I remember this, the name of this group came up that provided security, and it was Kroll, K-R-O-L-L, K-R-O-L-L. And I don't recall that much about them other than, like you say, Marvin Bush was on their board or something or another. But a friend of mine, I was talking to her yesterday on the phone, and she said, here, listen to this. She had on, I think it's called E. I guess that's a cable channel. And
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, I think it's like entertainment or something, entertainment channel or something, where they talk about fashion or who knows what. But they were actually covering the Weinstein story.
Yes.
And they were saying that he had employed former Mossad agents from Kroll. Now, I just became aware of Black Cube. I've never heard of that before. But they were referring to this company Kroll, which I'm wondering, is that the same company that, you know, former Mossad agents and whatnot that provided security so well for the World Trade Center that I remember from over a decade ago?
I don't remember the name of the company at the World Trade Center. I only remember the Marvin Bush connection.
Yeah, and oh god, I got his note in my phone, his name in my phone. There was another guy, just like in the past year. What was his name? Here's his name. He was a Hollywood producer. I think he made the film Fight Club, which I believe it or not, I actually never saw.
Arnon Milken. Yes.
L-C-H-A-N.
Arnon. Yeah, I'm familiar with him.
First name.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, he basically was acting as a Hollywood spy for Israel.
Yes.
To do with the Department of Defense and all this kind of stuff. So my point is, if this Kroll thing is connected to Weinstein, I mean, this stuff is going on. These intelligence operations.
Okay, well,
and
Frank,
whatnot, they're keeping it.
Frank, Mike in the control room basically just came on in and said that he seems to recall that the name of the security company with Marvin Bush was called either Securicom or later changed to Stratasec. So we're dealing with a different company.
Well, I do remember. Okay. Well, I remember it being Kroll, so maybe it keeps changing names too. I don't know what that would be about. But
well, it's about avoiding bad press. Look how often Blackwater changed their name. They went to XZ and then something else,
exactly.
And you know, it's to avoid the bad press.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. They keep reinventing their name, pretending like they're someone else.
Okay. All right, well, listen, Thank you for the information. We're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. A couple of things. This Iranian deal, isn't that a form of treason? And also, when it happened, didn't America have a boycott on Russia during that time?
Well, yeah, well, there was a lot of stuff going on. I mean, don't forget this was also back when all these Russian diplomats were being assassinated all over the world. So there was definitely something deep state going on. But the uranium, even without any sanctions or boycotts on Russia, the uranium is considered obviously a strategic material whose export is under serious government control. And they tried to sort of make this deal doable by saying that this was this Canadian company, even though the Canadian company was under the control of Russia's Rosatom. And so all these people inside the U.S. government had to sign off on it. And it's really spreading. It's not just Hillary. It's a lot of people that were in various other parts of the government. Apparently, Senator John McCain was officially notified that this stuff was going on and chose to do nothing with it. Now we've got the story we had earlier today about how decisions made by the Obama administration facilitated this deal. And apparently everybody was doing great off of this. But you're right. If, in fact, Russia is now our enemy, as we have been told repeatedly by the corporate media over the last several months, then allowing them to take control of 20% of our uranium ore and ship it who knows where around the world does amount basically to an act of treason. If that uranium has gone to countries that do not like us, they're now in the position of being able to build nuclear weapons. Because as I said earlier in the show, a basic uranium bomb, you know, like the little boy, it's actually very easy to build. The hard part is getting that uranium. Once you've got that, building the bomb is easy.
I guarantee you, and I could be wrong, I bet some of that uranium went to North Korea.
Could have. Some of it could have gone to Israel. We don't know. That's the problem. That we don't know where it went. I mean, basically, the people who facilitated the Uranium One deal have totally undermined efforts at nuclear nonproliferation. They basically created this trapdoor, and a huge amount of uranium has now flowed out onto the world's black markets.
This is one of the biggest stories in America's history, but yet and still the mainstream media won't even talk about it.
No, they won't.
So, well, Mike, I'm going to let you go. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, you two both.
Aloha.
Night bar included. I know you mentioned earlier about the chemical weapons that the U.S. is demanding that other countries give up and forfeit or whatever have you, pray tell what. But you know something? If you want another country to give up such, perhaps it would be a good idea if the said country or the government or military of said country does the same blooming thing and let it be done with.
Well, with regards to the chemical weapons, there is a treaty that all parties agreed to destroy all their chemical weapons, and most of the other countries have now fully complied, including Russia, and it's the United States which is delayed and dawdled and said, well, we'll get around to it eventually, but still has most of their chemical arsenal still intact.
Well, that's true, which leads into another aspect. I remember at one point you gave input or information regarding the aspect of what is called morgellons at one point, being a plant-based problem or issue or whatever the case might be.
I suggested a theory that it might have been an accidental effect of genetic engineering on crops because the filaments that are growing out of the patient's bodies have been found to have plant DNA in them.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that because you led me into the same vein of thought that well, since they're still doing chemical weapons for who knows where or whatever for, and so forth, and using them on the people here in the U.S. as well, which goes without saying, it doesn't surprise me that such a thing like that would be occurring because of the genetic mockery or engineering or pray tell what you want to call it, crisscrossing, splicing genes this way and that way. It's no surprise that people are experiencing issues biologically because of that, because their food chain is being tainted.
Well, yeah, but again, you're talking apples and oranges here because the chemical weapons are chemical weapons. We're not talking about biological weapons at this point, and there's nothing to indicate that morgellons had anything to do with a biowar agenda. It appears to me to have just been a bad accident by rushing these things out into the wild too quickly.
Well, that's true. That could be true, too. However, if something is biological, is that not still chemical? Because you have molecules and who knows what that's joined together to make up a biological particle, for that matter.
No, I mean,
it's all chemical.
No, the definition of a chemical weapon is like phosgene gas or mustard gas. These are chemicals. They are not components of living things. And biological weapons are basically those weapons made from living matter. That's the difference between the two.
Oh, okay. So you're defining between something being synthetic and something actually naturally biological.
No, I'm not saying that either. They can both be synthetic. But like anthrax spores is a biological weapon because anthrax is a life form, and sarin gas is a chemical weapon because sarin is not a living thing.
Well, I appreciate the clarification on that because, believe me, you can pretty much send the everyday person's mind into a mind span or a heel span trying to figure out what in the world is going on. Okay, thanks, Michael.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let you go, and the phone lines are now open. Getting on back to the Texas shooting, and I was kind of hoping to let it fade away, but apparently NBC News has interviewed a survivor who was shot but survived, who is insisting there was at least one other shooter high up in the church, possibly on the roof as well. So are we looking at another staged event? Can't rule it out. And that is the sad reality about the times that we are living in right now. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the Texas shooting, over at Judicial Watch, they have just come on out and said that they have confirmed that at least 1.1 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election. I'm sure the number is probably a lot higher, but this they've got confirmed. 1.1 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election. Our election system is a joke, and because of what Hillary did last year, we don't really know for sure who actually won yesterday's elections. We can't. We don't dare presume that our elections are producing the honest result of a vote of the legal voters. This is a crisis. And I would encourage Donald Trump to get his Commission on Election Integrity to get their act together and do something before next year's midterms. Or we're going to have a Democratic Congress that will move to impeach Donald Trump. They've already said that's the plan. Take control of Congress, impeach Donald Trump. Now, getting on back to the Texas shooting, of course, the gun grabbers are out there saying, ban guns, ban gun, ban gun. A lot of people are going the other way. And they're saying it's time to take our guns to church. Because had there been one armed person in that church, you wouldn't have had 26 dead bodies, you would have had one. And remember, Matthew 10:34, I do not come to bring peace, I bring the sword. Luke 22:36, if you don't have a sword, sell your clothes and buy one. Now, at the church where Claire does her choir, we had a problem with some violent homeless people. Now, we didn't have guns, but we did have pepper spray. So it's not a ridiculous idea that one will carry self-defense weapons inside a place of worship. Now, let's get on to this whole politically correct nonsense, because apparently over at the University of Pennsylvania, there's a teaching assistant, Stephanie McKellop, who tweeted last October that she will always call on black women students first, other people of color second, white women third, and then if she has to, she'll call on the white men. This is her idea of leveling the playing field. And no, it isn't, and it's ignited a controversy because you do not end racism by being racist. And we seem to have reached a point where the color of your skin or your sexual orientation or your gender is the dominating factor in your life's course. Forget about your abilities, forget about your talents and skills, forget about how hard you've worked to build those skills and talents and education. You've got to fit into somebody's little checkbox. Oh, we need a black, gay, transsexual something over here. And that's what they get. We need to return to a meritocracy where teachers are going to call on the students in their classroom who are the best and the brightest at what they're doing. And that's the way it should work. You call on the smart ones first. We're destroying our own civilization with all this nonsense here. Now, if you want to talk about nonsense, talk about it peaking. The California NAACP has gone on record saying it's time to drop the Star-Spangled Banner as a national anthem. And apparently, the organization issued a statement demanding Congress rescind, quote, one of the most racist, pro-slavery, anti-black songs in the American lexicon as the national anthem. And this apparently is following up on Colin Kaepernick, who basically started this whole thing by kneeling when the national anthem was being played. This is an attack on our national identity. First it was the Confederacy, then thereafter the U.S. flag, and now the national anthem. Now, if you look at the national anthem, There's nothing that's racist in there. It starts, "Oh, say can you see?" Now, that may upset the visually challenged people, but I don't think that's a reason to drop the national anthem. It's about a battle and a flag. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, this idea that now you've got the California NAACP saying the national anthem is racist, pro-slavery, anti-black, and needs to be abandoned as the national anthem. I mean, this has really reached ridiculous extremes. And what's really happening here that needs to be paid attention to is that all of this screaming and crying and violence and so forth, and the utter ridiculousness of some of these suggestions, like we're going to call on the black students first in class and the whites only if we have to. It's not going to get rid of racism. It's going to make it worse. Because unless you're willing to treat everybody around you equally, all you're doing is shifting the direction of the racism, and that is not a fix. It is the violence of Black Lives Matter and Antifa are actually working against their stated agenda. But then maybe their real agenda is to keep race relations, race hostility fanned up to be exploited by the Democrats in the next election. Now, apparently, let's see, as part of the deal for the Time Warner merger, let me see if I can get back to that here. Yeah, basically, no, I'm going to have to let that go and hunt that down during the next commercial break here. All right, apparently 21st Century Fox has been holding talks to sell most of the company to Disney. And Disney would not get all of Fox, but they're going to get most of it. Fox is said to believe that a more tightly focused group of properties around news and sports would compete more effectively. So apparently 21st Century Fox is literally getting out of the movie, TV business. They want to be just the news network and sports network. And I don't know if that's going to survive. And I'll tell you something that's very frustrating for those of us who have cable TV. Have you noticed how many reruns there are? You know, we're always hearing about these new blockbuster movies, except they're not really turning out that good. There really isn't a lot of new product coming on out. The studios are basically putting all their money into these hugely expensive blockbusters that TV channels like HBO can't compete with, although HBO's been doing some great stuff. If you look at Game of Thrones, for example. But unfortunately, as long as they're going to be out there pushing this or that group's propaganda, they're not going to get the audiences. You need to go back and look at the golden age of Hollywood during the Great Depression. People went to the movies to be distracted and entertained, not to be just reminded about what life was going on around them. That's never been a good formula. So if I were still in the industry, I'd be saying it's time for some plain old fun movies, you know, feel-good movies, fantasies, fairy tales, you know, fun stuff to take people away from the reality of what's going on around us right now. I noticed, however, the cable channels are starting to double up on the war movies, and I'm sure part of that is because Veterans Day is on Friday. But I'm sure the other part of it is they want everybody to think war is cool, war is what you see in the movies, and by the way, it is not. Now, interestingly enough, the FDA is now cracking down on claims that cannabis can cure cancer. And they're out there saying they're all unsubstantiated. There's absolutely no proof. And basically they sent warning letters to 4 companies that are illegally selling products online that claim to prevent, diagnose, treat, or cure cancer without evidence to support these outcomes. And the products allegedly contain cannabidiol, the CBD, a component of the marijuana plant that is not FDA approved in any drug for any indication. Well, is the FDA looking out for you, or are they looking out for the cancer establishment? Because there are people out there who insist that they have cured their own cancer with CBD oil. One of them is Alan Parks. He's a comedian, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer, and he was told by the doctors, you're going to die. Wrap up your personal affairs, get everything in order, get the funeral home checked out, you are going to die. And he basically went on the CBD oil, and he's still alive and kicking. And we're actually going to have him on our show on November 16th to talk about it. Now, speaking of cancer, I've often commented that one of the weirdest victories, if you will, that advertising ever accomplished was to convince women that what naturally comes out of their bodies to feed their babies was somehow inferior to what was coming out of a factory in cans and bottles. Baby formula. And the advertising apparently worked, and a lot of women moved away from breastfeeding, thinking they were actually doing what was best for their babies. But the fact of the matter is that what is in those factory-produced bottles is a very thin simulation of milk, and they still don't know everything that's in natural mother's milk because they haven't really been looking. And apparently scientists have discovered a substance in mother's milk, human alpha-lactobumin, is lethal to cancer tumor cells. And apparently it's already been tried out on mice. It attacks cancer cells without harming the healthy cells nearby. And it doesn't have any of the crippling side effects of chemotherapy. Well, you already knew that. Babies who are nursing on their mothers, they don't get sick. So, for you new young mothers, you might want to go back to the natural approach. Stop trusting these factories and the chemicals in the bottles and the cans. Remember that big stink, I think it was about last week, where all these baby foods were found to be contaminated with these heavy metals? I mean, it's not that hard to make baby food. Just take real, organic, healthy food, put it in a blender, hit puree, and you've got the baby food. How do these chemicals get in there? We don't know. But they're bad for the baby. Now, over in Minnesota, they have had an outbreak of tuberculosis. Now, remember, before this whole open borders, refugee, illegal immigrant thing, tuberculosis had been eradicated in the United States of America. I'm old enough to remember when that happened. When I was really young, tuberculosis was still a problem. And then there was this huge effort to eradicate it from the United States, and nobody was allowed to come into the United States without a TB test. And they're still keeping an eye out for it. When I got my job teaching over at UH Manoa, I had to get a TB test. So they're still on the lookout for it. But now, all of a sudden, thanks to the open borders, we have got all these illnesses coming into this country. There's even been cases of black plague in this country. So over in Minnesota, they've got this outbreak of tuberculosis. And what makes it worse is this is the multi-drug resistant strain. Very, very hard to fight. Very hard to control. Very expensive as well. And again, the short-sightedness of some of the policies that we've seen coming from the liberals. So what if some of you get TB? I mean, it's a small price to pay for a global society. It's going to be wonderful. Now, over in Great Britain, a family in Sussex is suing their doctor for giving their daughter, Jody, 8 vaccines at once in 1993. Now, the parents had requested only the MMR, the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine, be given to Jody, who was 14 months old at the time. And her mother had no idea that the doctor simply mixed in the polio, HIV, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccines in addition to MMR until she actually saw the vaccine card. And according to the parents, Jody reacted to the shot immediately. She began shivering and shaking, developed a high fever, started high-pitched screaming, which is something other parents of vaccine-injured children say happens to them, refused food. She has been unable to speak since, and she can't do anything for herself. She requires round-the-clock care. She can still walk, but she suffers from many health issues such as epilepsy and autism. Now, one of the problems you have with the vaccines, the testing is not robust, and nobody's ever tested what happens when you put these vaccines into a single syringe and how they interact with each other, how the adjuvants in vaccine A may have an effect on the pathogen in vaccine B. But there's this huge, huge cover-up in the name of protecting vaccine profits because vaccines are something like a $30 billion a year business now. Now, I don't know what the system is over in Great Britain. Apparently, they're able to sue their doctor for this problem. But here in the United States, we're living in a society in which corporate profits are the top priority. And what is happening to ordinary people, it's treated like an annoyance, an inconvenience. Oh, we've had another vaccine-injured child. Won't they just go away? Now, here in Hawaii, the good news is that the actual plume of radioactive water from Fukushima still has not reached here. It passed north of us as part of the North Pacific Gyre, and it will eventually turn around after it ricochets off the west coast of North America and get here. But, unfortunately, 13 commonly consumed types of fish caught locally around Hawaii have been found to be contaminated with Fukushima radiation. They all have detectable cesium contamination, cesium 134, 137, and basically what it means is anybody eating the locally caught fish is at risk of contamination. And you need to understand the difference between exposure and contamination. Exposure to radiation is momentary, like a chest x-ray. If you are contaminated, if you have eaten or inhaled one of these tiny radiating particles, it sits in your body and it goes on radiating, and at that point it's only a matter of time before the DNA damage leads to tumors or other problems. So this is going to be a real problem for seafood restaurants here in the islands. And the sushi places are already having to fly their fish in from South America. They don't dare catch the local fish anymore. So what is the world doing about Fukushima? Well, there's not much that they can do. And apparently France, which following Fukushima, said that they were going to cut their dependence on nuclear power to 50% by 2025, is now out there saying that, well, they're probably not going to be able to do that. They're backtracking on that already. All righty. Now, getting on down here, out in California, Government Moonbeam is out there saying the world needs brainwashing on climate change. He actually used that word. And he basically is trying to take this global warming out of the science arena where it's not doing well. And he's trying to make it an article of faith. And he's talking about how his history with the Jesuits and achieving transformation and getting people to believe. And he actually came out with this comment saying, at the highest circles, people still don't get it. It's not just a light rinsing that's required. We need a total, I might say, brainwashing. So that's what he's talking about. We're going to brainwash you into believing that human activity is warming the world, and then you will happily pay a carbon tax and do what we tell you. That's the thinking they're coming out there. And there's been a little bit of an embarrassment in the climate change, global warming orthodoxy. And this is going back to the Paradise Papers, because it has revealed that Prince Charles' estate secretly bought shares in an offshore company that would benefit from a rule change to Britain's climate policy. And apparently the Duchy of Cornwall invested $113,000 in an offshore carbon credits firm run by, quote, a close friend, end quote. The prince then made a bunch of speeches on the rules surrounding carbon credits And the rules were changed, and the duchy almost tripled the value of their investment in just over a year. I keep telling you, this is all a scam to get money, to get power, to get control. And we're already seeing signs of an early, hard winter here in the northern hemisphere. Snow is arriving early in a lot of places. It's arriving heavier than normal for this time of year. Now, the global warming people are out there saying, well, there's still, the ice is melting in Antarctica. You humans are melting the ice in Antarctica. Yeah, all we have to do is go down to Antarctica and take pictures of the melting ice, and that will prove it. Of course, the last time they tried to do that, they got stuck in the ice. But as it turns out, NASA has discovered evidence that there is a lot more volcanic activity underneath Antarctica than Mount Erebus. And it is this geothermal activity that is leading to some of the melting observed on the surface. Apparently, underneath Antarctica, there is a mantle plume like we have underneath Hawaii. And that is where the heat is coming from. Every time they say the humans are warming the ocean, the first thing I say is, how many active thermal vents and volcanoes are there on the floor of the world's oceans? And they'll go, I don't know. And I say, well, don't feel bad. It's a trick question. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how many active thermal vents and volcanoes are pouring heat into the ocean depths. And if you don't know that, and you can't correct for that, then any studies that claim to know how much humans are warming the ocean are just so much scientific wild guesses to keep the funding flowing in. Along with everything else in our society, even science has been perverted by money. And it's a shame to see. Now, a little bit of good news out there, though. Bill Nye, the not-so-very scientific guy, is admitting that his climate change crusades are not getting anywhere. He's not getting any traction with them. And the reason is because so many people can look out their windows and see the snow for themselves. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go to the phones here. Cliff in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Doing fine.
I have a question. Now, I haven't been able to hear your show today. I catch you the following day on YouTube. So I don't know if you've gone over this or not, but I didn't hear anything yesterday on the show. And I'm trying to understand how a U.S. Senator can be savagely beaten in his driveway and sustain the kind of injuries that we know he sustained, and the guy gets off with fourth-degree assault and gets out of jail the next day on like $7,000 bail. Now, if this happened in Rand Paul's district, I would think that the people of that area would have a lot of questions for the local police and why something more isn't being done about this. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, first of all, the guy who assaulted Rand Paul was his neighbor. I mean, obviously, senators and congressmen keep their addresses secret so that people who don't like them don't know where to find them. And the neighbor's not off the hook. He's, as you say, he's out of jail on bail, but he's still facing a trial, and he could still be looking at some serious jail time. Normally, Secret Service protection is not extended to members of Congress unless there is a known direct threat to them. But I can imagine Rand Paul just being in his own driveway just was not expecting this attack at all. And apparently Rand Paul is still not clear why he was attacked in the first place, and I imagine that his attacker is not going to say anything until he's actually in the court.
Have you heard any details about how he sustained the injury? I mean, was he kicked or hit with an object, or what's the story there?
I don't know if there was an object involved, but obviously, fists and punches, because most of the injury was to his rib cage, and apparently 4 of his ribs were cracked, some of them all the way through, and there may have even been a puncture to one of the lungs.
Yeah, that's what I heard. It doesn't sound like the kind of injuries that would come from being punched or a fist fight. It sounds like, I mean, you could make the case that it was attempted murder. If you're hitting someone in their ribs, that's where all their vitals are. So it just seems really odd to me that in Rand Paul's own district, I mean, if I attacked my neighbor for whatever reason and did that kind of damage, I would be sitting in jail. I wouldn't have gotten off on a fourth-degree assault. It would be a more serious. It would be a probably not a misdemeanor. And I'm just trying to understand how, to a U.S. senator, I mean, what kind of message does that send to everyone else? I mean, you can go and savagely attack a standing U.S. senator in his own district, in his own property, and get off on such a minor charge.
Well, it's not sending a very good message. I agree with that. But what's more alarming is that this attack appears to have resulted because for the last several months, we have been seeing this message that violence is okay against those whose politics you don't agree with. We certainly got that from Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all the liberals who were screaming and crying over Donald Trump's victory. Going to have to let you go, Cliff. We got to do a station identification. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we go back to the telephones here, apparently, Mike Pence is down there in Texas to meet with the victims of the Texas shooting. And already there is apparently another shooting incident in Floresville, near Floresville Nursing Home and Pecan Park on Hospital Boulevard. And this article I'm looking at doesn't even say what state it's in. So it's obviously local news. But it looks to me like I'm starting to get really suspicious that we're going to see a whole flood of these staged shootings until the gun grabbers get the guns. So they seem to be ramping that one up quite a bit. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Dan in British Columbia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Talking about climate change. We've just had a new government here in British Columbia, Canada. And it's kind of a coalition government with a Green Party and New Democrats. And I know that sounds pretty scary. But one of the first things they did when they got into office was now we're not allowed to know where the green carbon tax goes. It used to be revenue neutral. And now it's supposed to be it was supposed to be for green buses and putting in bike lanes, all that kind of stuff. Now we're not allowed to know where the money's going, and it's going into the general coffers. And this is one of the most, climate progressive places in North America. So it just goes to show you that it's a big scam. It's all for money. People are being duped, and I'll take your answer off the air. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, we know that this kind of thing is going on all the time. We just had that story about the property tax increases down on Maui, and the people of Maui were told, we're going to take this money, but we're going to improve public services to you. And, of course, it didn't happen. The money is being shuffled off to prop up the state's employee pension system, which is in serious trouble. When we lived in California and they were first starting to put together that California lottery, and it was going to benefit the education system, and that's what they got it past the voters with. Where we'll have a lottery, it's going to benefit the education system, and the schools were in pretty bad shape, and I know because I taught in one of them. And all of a sudden what happened was as soon as the lottery money started coming into the education system, the state government simply pulled back the state funding for education by the exact same amount. So the schools never actually benefited, and the state government now had more money to play with in their general fund. And so, this kind of subterfuge and deception is going on all the time. All of these governments are broke. All of these governments are hideously in debt because none of them will stand up and recognize the fact that private central banking, by design, creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And they need to shut that down if you're going to have a functioning, balanced economy that serves the people in the nation. Now, Canada, originally, the Charter for the Bank of Canada, which is owned by the people of Canada, was supposed to provide interest-free loans for infrastructure development as a way of easing the burden on the taxpayers. But unfortunately, Canada's government some years ago stopped using the interest-free loans and started borrowing for infrastructure development from the regular commercial banks. Apparently, it was a requirement of the deal to join the World Bank, and it led to this lawsuit, which was hushed up, about why the government of Canada is choosing to borrow money at interest and stick the Canadian taxpayers with that interest bill rather than avail themselves of the interest-free loans guaranteed by the Charter of the Bank of Canada. So all these governments are playing these games, and you're right, it's all about getting more money and more power and more authority. And every government on earth is hopelessly in debt. And that right there tells you there's something wrong with the way economics are being run. Because in theory, with a fair and balanced economic system, half the countries would be in debt and half the countries would be in a surplus. And I remember before Reagan was elected, the U.S. government was one of the greatest creditors on earth. And now we're one of the biggest debtors. So something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And this whole global warming is just another scam to try and trick you out of more of your money. You know, we need a little more of your money to save planet Earth. All right, here's a little more money. We need a little more of your money to save the people of Syria from the evil Assad. All right, here's a little more money. But we're running out of money. That's the problem. Washington, D.C. stretches their talons out to grab a little more wealth to themselves, and all they're getting back are wood splinters from the bottom of a very empty barrel. And that's why they're in a panic, because they understand that the American people are no longer this reliable source of unending wealth that can be grabbed and put into the government. And that's why it's all coming to an end here. All right, let's see. We're going to go to David in San Francisco. David, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Michael, two things. I was spurred to call by the Rand Paul thing, and I found an article, it's from CBS just basically an hour ago, and according to Rand Paul's Twitter or tweet, he says, I appreciate all the support from everyone. A medical update report indicates 6 broken ribs, and a new x-ray shows a pleural effusion.
Oh, boy.
And I don't remember, is an effusion a bruise that creates a whole bunch of excess blood around the lungs?
Yeah, it might be. I'd have to look up the exact definition of that term, but it does sound like...
EFF.
Yeah, it does sound bad.
But
did they mention whether the person who attacked him with a weapon? Because that kind of damage, that sounds like, a baseball bat or like a rake handle or something.
No, it doesn't, and I'd been wondering about that myself. Somebody said that they live in this kind of a prissy neighborhood, a tidy neighborhood, and you're not supposed to have grass clippings on your lawn. And so this neighbor apparently has got one of these super tidy, neat lawns, and Rand Paul was just buzzing through without his lawn catcher on it, or his grass catcher on it. And so this has been going on for some years, that he never uses a grass catcher and forces this guy to rake his...
I'm having a real hard time with that one, but some people can get their knickers in a twist over some very, very silly things here.
Well, that's right, yeah. Now, the other thing, I've talked to you before about the Green Party, and with that last caller... I'm calling you from San Francisco, where the Green Party puts out a lot of good ideas, but the old boy system find a way to screw it up. So, for example, it's been now 22 years ago that we legalized marijuana for medical use, and already today I attended a press conference where virtually no cannabis shop can get set up in this city anymore because of zoning restrictions saying you can't have it within a certain distance of a school. And so for every possible proximity to a school, there's no business district that won't be affected, and so it'll basically make it impossible to set up a cannabis shop in the very city where we got it legalized to begin with. And so there was a press conference on that today, and some of the members of the Board of Supervisors are intent upon reversing that. And that gives a kind of a correlation to what the earlier guy was talking about. Greens will come up with basic, here in San Francisco, we since we're a peninsula, we don't have any land to dump trash in. We don't have any garbage dumps in San Francisco proper. So we have to actually either rent a spot in some other county, or we have to figure out some other way of getting rid of our trash. And San Francisco having so many restaurants, we have a magnificent amount of grease, and so making biodiesel became a huge deal. And the restaurants get a break for giving their excess grease over to the biodiesel producers, who then give it to the bus system for basically cost. And so we get rid of our grease via biodiesel, and that seems like a great idea until some of the oil and gas boys decided to ruin a few batches, and that damaged enough buses that it, made the refineries, the biodiesel refineries, crippled. So, never underestimate the old boy network finding a way to ruin a good idea.
Well, it's not necessarily old boy. I mean, it's an interesting name here, but what you're seeing is corporations whose profits are threatened are going to do everything they can to protect those profits. In the case of the marijuana legalization, the primary movers that are trying to get marijuana returned to being a totally illegal drug are the alcohol and tobacco industries. What they're really afraid of is that marijuana becomes legalized and somebody gets some seeds into the country and people start growing the stuff in their backyard, then they're not going down to the stores anymore and buying the product, and corporations making money off of it. The goal of all of corporatism is to make us dependent on the corporations for absolutely everything we need.
Yeah, although there's a third, and that's the pharmaceutical industry, who, I got rid of bronchitis. I fought it with antibiotics and couldn't get rid of it. But I've done this 3 times now. I've had bronchitis that came that close to pneumonia, and the way I got rid of it was I found the cheapest pot I could get, Mexican dirtweed, basically.
Yes.
And I'd find the funniest book. So I would sit there and laugh and cough and laugh and cough and cough and laugh and cough until it took me 2-3 days to cure myself, while the antibiotics just wouldn't do it for weeks. So, never underestimate the pharmaceutical industry having a vested interest in making sure that this zoning plan goes through. Yeah, Colorado is facing this, the DEA. You talk about a bunch of bureaucrats that are trying to hold on to their jobs. You got state after state after state legalizing it. You've got places like western Kansas that used to grow hemp, in the 19-teens, the 1920s, the 1800s. Hemp was 1/3 of the American economy. It wasn't just rope. It was paper. It was high-quality cloth. It was burlap bags. It was silage for cattle.
Yes.
It was hundreds and hundreds of uses, oils, all sorts of different things.
It's a very useful plant.
And when William Randolph Hearst decided to outlaw it, he figured out that if he called it hemp, he'd get laughed out of there. But if he called it marijuana, nobody had ever heard of the word marijuana before, and outlawing marijuana, well, I guess we could, but it was 1/3 of the American economy. And all of a sudden, this one guy, William Randolph Hearst, outlaws 1/3 of the American economy and forces us to go over to oil, to petroleum, in other words, and cutting down trees, which is a very wasteful way of making paper. So, you have an annual plant like hemp versus a perennial like a tree. You take a 75-year-old tree and turn it into paper instead of taking a 1-year crop of hemp.
Yep.
Huge waste. So, yeah.
I'm in agreement with you. I mean, here in Hawaii, they do have medical marijuana allowed, but again, I think the real fear is the established corporate profits, whether it's big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharmaceuticals. They want it all to go away, and Sessions is clearly, obviously, on board with them. Anyway, listen, David, we're going to have to let you...
Thanks.
Yeah, we have to let you go here. Do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network here, and we're going to go to Andy in Texas. Andy, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, Mike, I think... there's several things weighing on my mind. I think everybody in this country can say there's several things weighing on their mind. But one of the things I want to say is that we're all being very overcautious about Donald Trump. I mean, there's no doubt, unless this is a serious psyop, there's no doubt that Donald Trump is not the favorite of anybody involved in this big conspiracy that we've exposed here. I mean, because he's totally at the other end of all of these jokes. He's the butt end of the joke. So having said that, either this is a really serious psyop, or he's actually doing whatever he can do. And with a deep state government that is, we've already revealed there is a deep state government, his hands perhaps are tied, and he can only do so much. So, and don't get me wrong, I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for anybody. I gave that privilege up long ago, but I still thought he was the better candidate. But like you say, the lesser of two evils is still evil, and I want to see a lot more. But having said that, I think that Donald Trump is in a position where he's doing what he can, and he just jumped into a position that ended up not being what he thought it might be, or maybe he knew this. Maybe he knew this. But being a billionaire,
I disagree with that one. I think he had a very naive image of what being president was going to be like, and I think the reality has been very hard for him to deal with.
Well, and perhaps it was, and absolutely it was. But maybe let's just give the little, 10% doubt on that perhaps he knew he had to, and maybe he was still a patriot with that 10% notion that he could do something. You know what I mean?
Again, we can speculate wildly about what's going on, whether Trump has been threatened, whether he's simply been bought, whether he's having to just, be controlled by those who supported him in his candidacy. But at this point, actions speak louder than words, and what we're seeing is that we did not get the Donald Trump we thought we were voting for on many areas. And of course, the war issue is the biggest disappointment for me. And the second biggest disappointment for me is that Hillary Clinton is not yet facing her day in court. And those are the two biggies for me.
And truth be told, Mike, I can't see any reason why we are not seeing trials with Hillary Clinton right now, and Bill Clinton for that matter, and everybody in the Obama administration, and those people who were in charge of 9/11 and all that stuff, they did their stuff. I just can't believe that we're in a position in a world today where we still think we're free, and these people are the freest people in the world because they're never charged with anything, and yet you and I have to go into court for petty stuff.
Well,
Mike.
You're welcome. The reason is very simply, thank you for the call, we're going to let you go. The problem is that it's all swamp. And there is nobody inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. that you can hire into a position of authority or responsibility who is not already compromised in some way to some part of that narcocracy. And we're seeing it already with Uranium One, where the lawyers on Mueller's special counsel office signed off on the Uranium One deal. They're compromised by it. And again, Trump's biggest mistake coming on in was to be magnanimous in victory and to allow all these holdovers to remain in their jobs, thinking that they would now switch their loyalty to him. And that may be the way it works in the business environment. It's not the way Washington, D.C. works. Donald Trump was an outsider, and he should have brought in an outside staff for the White House. There are very capable, talented people out here in this country who are not part of that political clique inside the Beltway. People like Larry Klayman or Alan Favish, who would be very good at doing the jobs that need to be done inside that government. But the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is president of a government that is basically surrounding him and saying, we're not going to let you go in any direction other than what we choose for you. And, Donald Trump, he may be looking for a way to have a breakout, but he's surrounded himself, again, he's tried to drain the swamp, and then he turns around and he hires the alligators and the water moccasins into his key staff positions. So he's already hamstrung himself, is unfortunately the reality here. And even though so far he's going along with all the agendas, they still want to kick him out. And I'll tell you right now, if Trump's Commission for Election Integrity does not get their act together and get some major changes to make our elections honest by this time next year, then we will have a Democratic Congress by hook or by crook, mostly by crook, and they will impeach Donald Trump. They want him out of there. just to prove that they are still in control of the United States of America and not you, the American people. That's what's going on. All righty, we're coming up here on another commercial break. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about technology and computers and a few other things that are going on as well. So please stay tuned, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently people are sending me more information about Rand Paul. They're saying that he was literally tackled by the neighbor, that it was over this landscaping argument. I got to tell you, this is starting to feel like Harry Reid's exercise machine accident. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe something else is going on where Rand is being threatened and somebody sent a message to him. So we'll keep an eye on that here. Meanwhile, back to the phones here. Robert in Missouri. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to correct a previous caller about paper manufacturing. Paper's not made from hardwood. It's made from southern yellow pine.
Yes.
It's grown as a crop in the south, just miles and miles of it. It's very renewable.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Hardwood is not used for paper.
No, it's southern yellow pine, and it's grown and it's replanted as it's used.
Yeah, I remember when I lived in Washington State and we saw all these areas where they literally had date signs on them. These were planted in this year, and yeah, it was a rotating thing. And Weyerhaeuser definitely had a good program of sustained growth for their wood pulp.
Could I bring up one other fact? Do you know the percent CO2 in the air?
Not at the moment.
I do. 0.038. That's a percent of CO2 in the air. And every plant needs it.
Yes, absolutely. The more CO2 there is, the faster plants will grow and the more food they'll produce.
Right, and most people don't realize how little CO2 there is in the air. It's 0.038. That's the amount of CO2.
Okay, but CO2 was picked as the demon gas because it could be linked to human activity. There are far more potent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the biggest one being water vapor. But you're not going to convince people they need to pay a tax because there's clouds over their home. And then you have methane, which is 10 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but is produced by bovine flatulence and deep crust microbes and termites, life forms that are all too smart to fall for Al Gore's nonsense. And so they settled on carbon dioxide because that one they could say, oh, carbon dioxide comes from human activity. See, it's all your fault.
Well put. Thank you for your show.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Boy, there's a lot of breaking news going on here. Let's see now. Let's get rid of that here. Now, as you know, many years ago, the United States put up the Global Positioning System. And it has two flavors. There's the military grade, which is very accurate, and then they had the civilian grade GPS, which had a deliberately induced wobble, so that it couldn't be used for accurate targeting of, shall we say, rafts with bombs on it or anything like that. And the wobble basically made GPS useless for anybody except if you were out in the ocean. And so after a while, especially with the development of radio hams creating what were called ground correctors, local correctors, they turned off the wobble, and that's why GPS is now good enough to navigate down the streets of your city with. And it's become a very important part of our economy and our industry and our infrastructure. And it is, of course, a very powerful part of our military because of all the weapons that are guided to their targets by the military side of GPS. Now, the U.S. has always maintained a right, if you will, to shut off GPS to prevent its being used by other countries against us in the event of war. And so other countries have already started putting up their own satellite-based ground navigation systems. And the newest one is coming from China. They're getting ready to launch it. And this one will be accurate to the millimeter. That's the accuracy they're saying their system will be able to accomplish. Well, you're not even going to need a tape measure anymore. just take a position here and a position there and let the calculator do the rest, that's going to be amazingly accurate. What a wonderful tool for things like archaeology. So we're coming up here on another commercial break. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and when we come on back, more about science and all kinds of things that are going on in breaking stories. So stay tuned. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones here. Rick in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Rick, are you there?
Coming in, Mike.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay. Hey, I think they brought... Okay. I think they're bringing in Trump here. He's going to sign gun control legislation. I'm predicting that. He talks too much in the campaign about mental illness. And they're not going to ban the gun. They're going to ban the person. That's my prediction. And it's going to be the same thing. He's going to sign the legislation that decides who gets guns. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for taking my call.
Okay, well, thank you for the call, Rick. We're going to let you go here. See, here's the problem. There were already laws in place that would have prevented this shooter from having a gun. This was a screw-up by the government, by the Air Force, because this guy's history did meet the criteria for refusing to allow him to buy guns, and he got them anyway. And so what we have here are existing laws that were not being effectively enforced. And instead of talking about let's enforce the laws we have, politicians will say, well, we'll pass more laws, and I'll be able to campaign next year that I voted yes on this law. It's the same thing with immigration. We don't need new laws regarding control of our borders. We need to enforce the ones that are already there in Title VIII. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Murr in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, greetings, Mike. How you doing?
I'm fine.
Guess whose birthday it is? Ursula Haberbeck. She's 89.
Oh, that's true. I did see that. And, happy birthday to Ursula.
And right on Election Day. And guess what? Trump yesterday recognized the victims of Bolshevism. Wasn't in the Bolshevik news, though, was it?
No, it wasn't.
And I had one other thing. Oh, I was going to say, everyone be sure and read your natural news today. There's several articles that sound really good, but the one in particular made me think about you, the apples and grapes, polyphenols. I saw you eating grapes on air there.
Yes.
And lavender. And there were a couple other things, community garden, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm a believer in community gardens. I used to call it guerrilla gardening, and the idea was that everybody just goes on out to their local home and garden store, and they buy a bunch of vegetable seeds, and they just plant them on any open stretch of ground, and they just start growing, and all of a sudden you have a food source that is not coming through the supermarkets. It's certainly going to help feed the homeless. And all it's going to cost you is a few bucks in seeds to get it started.
Oh, and even better than that, too, well, along with that, know what is good that grows wild. There are a lot of things that grow wild. That's really no-till, huh?
Well, there's a lot of things that grow wild, but you have to be trained and educated to know what to eat and what not to eat. You can't just walk into the forest.
Not that different.
Well, I know.
No.
I went through all that when I was in the Boy Scouts, and again, when we moved here to Hawaii. We don't have a lot of poisonous stuff here in Hawaii, but there are a few things that you need to watch out for.
Yep. Well, that's under the community article there, too, Natural News, I believe. Let me see.
Okay,
Don't shy away from the wild edibles.
Yeah, remember...
And then he lists a few.
Oh, remember
Violet,
that...
dandelion,
Remember Yul Gibbons? He actually wrote a book on stalking the wildlife, and then he did all those cereal commercials about how healthy he was eating all this stuff in the woods, and then he died of a heart attack.
Oh, dear.
Yes.
Well, you got to have your fats. That's probably what was wrong.
Well, I don't know. He was always out there saying, ever eat a copper tea kettle and many parts are edible. So.
Oh. Well, you got to drink and poop. Got to do a lot of that.
And on that happy note, Murr, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. Now, Prince William is out there urging for depopulation efforts in Africa. He's saying that the population of Africa is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the natural world. Well, Prince, like being the one to tell you this, but we human beings, we're part of the natural world. I'm part of nature. And because humans are tool-using by nature, this computer's part of nature. This light fixture is part of nature. We're all part of nature. And we have as much right to be here as anything else. Alarmingly, though, all of a sudden we seem to be seeing Black Death exploding all over Madagascar and 9 neighboring countries and islands. And now we have Marburg showing up on the Kenya-Uganda border. So it looks like Prince William may be getting his wish. But Prince William reminds me of one of those people who thinks that the world would just be so much more wonderful for the elite and the rich if they could get rid of all those icky-poo human beings who just stand up and demand things because we made promises last election. And the last Tom Clancy book I really liked, it's before he started getting all these ghostwriters involved, was Rainbow Six. And the storyline behind that was a group, a conspiracy of ultra-rich people who were going to wipe out 95% of the human population and let the world go back to nature, except, of course, for those carefully manicured lawns around their palaces. And I liked the final resolution in that story. I'll let you find out for yourself. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, okay. You mentioned Trump, so whenever Trump comes up, I recall back in March when APAC came to town.
Yes.
I don't think they ever leave town, do they?
No, they don't.
Henry Makow, M-A-K-O-W, Henry Makow, a couple of years ago, I happened to come upon him, and he had an astonishingly revealing article regarding Shabbat Lubavitch. And it just so happens APAC is predominantly, if not exclusively, Shabbat Lubavitch occupied,
yes,
or populated. And Henry Makow said, "Is Shabbat, this is the title, is Shabbat a criminal, racist, terrorist organization?"
I remember seeing that article.
Caused me, yeah, and he had a picture of Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Man, I tell you what, that guy, oh man, a perfect incarnation of a humanoid demon. Well, Menachem Mendel Schneerson is honored by Public Law 102-14 of 20 March 91. It's called Noahide Law's Education Day.
Yes.
And it's in honor of him. And I remember seeing a photograph of H.W. Skull and Bones Bush as he was signing it into law.
Yes.
And believe it or not, Mike, the very first tenet of Education Day is idolatry worship. And according to Shabbat Lubavitch, anyone that worships a so-called God other than their God, which they claim, that's why Tex Mars, who revealed this with John Stadtmiller last year, Tex Mars wrote the book Holy Serpent of the Jews. Well, the Shabbat people, they worship Lucifer, Hasatan, Baphomet, Jabalon. And they're the ones responsible for the Freemasonic God.
Wait a minute. Okay, I have to call you on that one because Baphomet, as I recall, was the name given to an artifact that was held in high esteem by the Templars. And it was thought to either probably be the mummified head of John the Baptist. So I think you need to sort of pull back and go over your sources again here because you're throwing out a lot of words and names. You're even mispronouncing a few of them. I believe it's pronounced Shabbat. And take a look at that. So we're going to let you go. We're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. And we're going to get back to the news here. Now, apparently, former Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer was testifying before Congress earlier today and basically apologized for the Yahoo hacks and claims that no company is immune in this era of what she calls nation-state hacking. So she's going along with this idea that this was all done by Russia as opposed to the NSA or something. And it's easy for her to get up there and apologize. She left the company last January with a $23 million severance package along with $186 million in stock options. So we seem to live in a society where people who screw up really big time seem to do out very, very well, and people who are just doing their job normally and getting things done are sort of looked down on and askance, if you will. Now, apparently, there's a move in Congress to use social media for censorship. And apparently, Representative Adam Schiff, Trey Gowdy, Dianne Feinstein, Senator Mark Warner, Representative Jackie Speer, Senator Tom Cotton, Representative Joaquin Castro tried to browbeat executives from Facebook, Twitter, and Google into blocking all digital dissent to the anti-Trump Russian line taken by the Democratic National Committee and the military security complex and to serve as spy agencies for the CIA. And I'm a little surprised to see Trey Gowdy being a part of this, but apparently they have aligned themselves with this idea that this was all Russia's fault. And so apparently the thing that unites all these Republicans and Democrats is the desire for a total police state. And they also want these social media platforms to spy on you, which is a good reason to stop using those social media platforms. Now, we've been talking about the iPhone 10 or the iPhone X, whichever you want to call it, and it's apparently not going to be one of Apple's premier products. It's costing $1,000. Apparently, it only cost them $357 to make. They're putting a huge uplift on it. And it turns out it's failing in its early drop test by testers, by product testers. Apparently, the fact that it's got glass on both sides to allow the wireless charging to work. Other phones have plastic. And apparently it's just not, it's not robust, it's not sturdy. The facial scanning system fails repeatedly. And they don't have the fingerprint button to allow you to get in there an easier way. You have to type in your 6-digit PIN code. I don't think it's going to be a huge seller. And I got to tell you right now, I certainly would not be inclined to have one. I mean, I resisted upgrading from my iPhone 5 until literally there was no other choice. Now I'm on an iPhone 7. I'm perfectly happy with it. And I'm going to keep it until it gives up its ghost. I'll skip over the iPhone 10 to something else. Now, apparently, there's been another scandal. This one involves the Ultimate Fighting Championship pay-per-view UFC.tv site, which streams mixed martial arts competition in which you get to watch men and women in really tight clothing beat the heck out of each other in a cage. And what is going on is people are paying money to watch this, and at the same time, their PCs are being hijacked by Monero miners. So while you're paying to watch these battles, your computer is being hijacked to mine cryptocurrency for somebody somewhere in the system. I think that's dirty pool. Now, as you know, a year ago, there was a major distributed denial of service attack that caused internet outages across the U.S. It targeted the internet infrastructure company Dyn, which provides domain name system services to look up web servers. And apparently, Monday, there was another nationwide series of outages, but this one had a much simpler cause. Now, at Level 3, which is an internet backbone company and enterprise ISP, they said there was a misconfiguration, and it created a ripple effect causing problems for companies like Comcast, Spectrum, Verizon, Cox, and RCN across the country. Our problem is we have allowed this technology to become too complex, to become decadent. And the more complex it becomes, the more error-prone it is, the more failure-prone it is, the more difficult and costly it is to maintain, and the easier it is for the cyber criminals to find ways through it to attack us. We need to reverse direction and go back to simplicity and things that work. A lot of people were very upset to find out that there is a Minix operating system inside Intel's CPU chips. Never mind your operating system and all your peripherals, Intel's chips actually have an internal Minix operating system and a software stack which includes networking and a web server. And it's as insecure as it can be. It's wide open for somebody to take control of your machine, and people are very upset about this. Now they're trying to find out if AMD is doing the same thing. But it's rather alarming to live in a country where every single device that you buy has been engineered to work against you, to invade your privacy on behalf of the government and indirectly the cyber criminals. Now, apparently, you can still PWN Android gear with Wi-Fi packets, even though it's 2017. They're saying you need to get your patches out on that. Do you know when Rome fell? When Rome began to fall, yes, it was hideous amounts of debt, and that in turn led to another reality. Rome had invented all this amazing technology. They'd invented concrete, the aqueducts, the roads, all of this stuff, and it made the empire work, this infrastructure. And all of a sudden, when it became too extended across the empire, and they didn't have the money, and they couldn't maintain it any longer, Rome began to crumble and fall. And the same thing is happening here in the United States. We've allowed our infrastructure to decay to the point where it can't be repaired anymore. We've allowed our computer infrastructure to become so complex and obfuscated, it can't be easily fixed and maintained. And it's being taken over by the cyber criminals. And if history is to guide us, if the history of Rome is to guide us, this is the opening fanfare of the last days of the great American empire. Now, apparently, down in Texas, there's a pilot program by the National Guard, and they've taken 2 Texas National Guard surveillance aircraft, and they have installed technology from Maryland-based digital receiver technology, which basically allows them to fly overhead and listen to your cell phone calls, grab photos and text messages on your cell phones, just flying overhead with this equipment. And I don't think the cell phones would be giving up this information unless they had already been pre-programmed to recognize the signals coming in from these devices and say, here's what we've got. Here's what we've got. Got to be careful what you put on those devices. They're not secure. You should think of them as outside your privacy perimeter, not inside. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And getting back to the idea that maybe you should treat your cell phone and tablet as being outside your personal private space is this object lesson that is coming in from Qatar Airways. And apparently there was this couple and their child were flying to Bali, Indonesia for a holiday after boarding in Doha. And apparently just for whatever reason, while the husband was sleeping, the wife took his thumb, put it on the fingerprint on the phone, decided to peek at what the husband was doing, and discovered he was having an affair. And needless to say, she was not entirely cheerful about this, and she basically just started beating up her husband on board this flight. The cabin crew could not get her to stop, and they actually had to do an emergency landing in Chennai, India, to get the family off the plane. So, object lesson there. If you're doing something that's stupid, don't even keep it on your cell phone. It's really ridiculous. Okay, last phone call of the day. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. That's good advice, considering our cell phones to be public and outside of our personal privacy. I'm actually going to take that advice to heart. It just clicked inside of me. You're right. Of course you're right. From now on, anything I do or say or store on my phone, I'm just going to consider as if I've posted it online or that I put a sign outside. And, yeah, that's good advice.
Yes.
Hey, I just got like a random list. I called in late, so it's more appropriate to have off-topic things, if you don't mind. You can try some.
Okay, but we're almost out of time, so go quick.
Okay, remember that famous footage of that bridge that was knocked down by wind?
Galloping Gertie.
Right, and the reason it fell down is because the wind was whistling through the structure and it made a tone, like a sound tone, and then it just so happened that the bridge was constructed to be resonant to a certain frequency that the wind happened to be making, and then it resonated and built up the power of the wind and until it fell down. And there's this doctor, his first name is Rife, like the first 4 letters in rifle, And if you look up rife frequencies, he spent his life's work finding out what kind of frequencies can destroy bacteria and viruses in the same way that that bridge was destroyed. And it's very fascinating that there is ways of targeting specific viruses with specific frequencies and killing them off.
As I recall, he was never actually able to find a frequency that would work on a virus or bacteria and not harm the cells near it. But what's really interesting is, you know, those backscatter machines they have at the airport that they claim are harmless. Well, it turns out they're not, because a study over at Johns Hopkins has uncovered a new phenomenon called molecular resonance, probably along the same lines as this Rife did, where repeated exposure to this radio signal can get your molecules shaking hard enough to cause molecular damage. And if that molecule happens to be DNA, then you're looking at a real problem. But again, all of this stuff is being marketed and sold and forced on us to make a fast buck, and nobody's really concerned with the long-term health consequences of any of this stuff. Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of...
Mateus, I got to let you go.
That's it. Okay.
That's
Have a
it.
good day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to call it an end to our show here today and get something useful done with the rest of the afternoon. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. He's got a lot of wonderful stuff to share with you. Please take what you learn here and just send it out to everybody that you know. Keep the focus on Uranium Gate, Dossier Gate, and Primary Gate. We have to keep pushing this stuff forward. So we'll be back here tomorrow. Aloha, America.